Happy Halloween to those unfortunate enough to click on this video. Or at least, I was writing this during Halloween. Whatever, it's spooky season. So why not talk about one of the best spooky games ever made? OneShot is easily my favorite single-player game of all time. However, I haven't really had anything to say about it. Sure, it's really good, but pretty much everything that had to be said has already been said. But, thankfully, I found another reason why we should continue to praise this game. Because while OneShot's story, world, and especially characters are all great, one of the best things it does that manages to make the usual inventory puzzle gameplay actually good instead of just confusing or boring. So, let's go and look at why we should appreciate OneShot's gameplay more. Which, while they don't have too much depth and aren't too interesting as a result, they still function well and serve a good purpose in terms of breaking up the story modes as well as fulfilling the interactivity of the game. What's great about these puzzles is that they manage to sidestep a common problem of a lot of inventory puzzles. Either they're too simple and obvious, or they're too convoluted and make you think, how was anyone supposed to figure this out? Let's take the very first puzzle in the game. You're given a remote, and you need to open a computer. This may seem like another mood logic puzzle. However, the game gives you some hints through the flavor text. The remote is said to have some of the buttons missing and that's too dark to read. However, there's a window with the light in it. You can probably guess where this is going. Just by reading a bit, you manage to solve the puzzle while thinking, yeah, that makes sense. There's a ton of these flavor text descriptions that end up adding so much to the game. But you want to know what else serves the great purpose in adding hints while also building the world? Notes. There are various interactable notes in the overworld of OneShot, and they're one of the best parts of the game. One of the best things about them is world building. Simply by going around and interacting with these pieces of paper either on the wall or ground, you get a ton of information about the world. I know some people don't like reading, but personally, I think it's less of, actually reading and more than just want to passively absorb the information. For me, I just really love going around and getting all the information that's just lying around. Some of this information is also directly tied to the puzzles. For example, there's this area above that's filled with toxic gas which you're not allowed to go to, for now. However, there's a note hinting at there being a gas mask nearby, so eventually you push on and end up getting it. Later in said upper area, you require a cleaning substance, so the game has notes instructing you how to make it in one of the rooms. You now know the logic of the world. Now all that's left is to get what you need. Not only that, but it ends up adding a ton of character. Some of the notes aren't really tied to the puzzles, but rather to people that live in the world itself. Like this one, talking about how they're worried about keeping the engineer here, which is some nice foreshadowing for a later interaction. There are some stories about moving away from the parents, and there's a suicide note. This also goes into setting the tone of the game, which, as expected by the literal lack of a sun, is dark. Sure, it's a nice fantastical world with a bunch of nice people around, but we're still facing the end of the world, and the game lets you know that without directly shoving it in your face. The game takes a show, don't tell approach, which is appreciated in a sea of games that don't want you to think for yourself and just soak in the spectacle. Another way the game organically gives you hints is with the characters. With a lot of games that deliver clues during the characters, it's usually obnoxious, and that's for two reasons. The first is that they basically give you the answer for free only after a few seconds. This completely defeats the point of a puzzle, but it's fine, it's only for accessibility, right? Everyone else can ignore it. That leads to the second main problem. They don't give you enough time to go, dang, this puzzle's tricky, I better get some help. Instead, you take 2 steps and some character goes, hey, maybe you should do this. The most egregious example of this is so many games like Horizon and the Norse God games, as it's gotten comical how much they want the puzzle to be skipped. OneShot differs from this by doing the smart thing of letting the player choose if they want the hint or not. I know, mind-blowing game design. You can continue to try to figure out the puzzle yourself, or you can go around talking to NPCs and try to find the answer. It makes sense in world, as Nico is the only person that can save the world and it's in everyone's interest to try to help. However, it's mostly assumed that the guidance of you is already enough. so they only give a hint when asked by Nico. It's not usually an obvious tip either, it's more implied rather than explicit tips that are given in your average Sony game. And there's also one puzzle where it's basically required to talk to NPCs to get the answer, but I still end up brute forcing the puzzle like an absolute gorilla. Once again, the game will let you be stupid on your own. Another thing this does is build the characters, as how the dialogue goes indicative of the character, whether the NPC simply being done with you, or kept kindly telling you how you should get into the library. In other games, it's simply, hey, you should try this. However, the best character that does this is the main character of the game, Nico. One of those unique parts of a OneShot is that you, the player, and the player character are two separate people. And it's not like Delta and Eva where you basically control Chris like a meat puppet until the end of the game. Nico is willingly following your instruction because both of you have the same common interest. This also applies to some of the puzzles, as if you end up choosing the wrong item on the wrong thing, Nico will explain to you why you're an idiot for even considering that option. Okay, maybe it's not as harsh as I made it out to be, but you get the point. It's not a full solution or a hint, as if Nico knew the answer, the puzzle would be solved already, and we wouldn't need to be here outside the fourth wall puzzles. However, since you don't have any physical influence over the world, Nico is still needed to fix everything that's broken, including the fact we still have no son. You know everything I've talked about up to this moment about the dialogue, the notes, the characters, everything like that? Well, all of that gets enhanced by the virtue of Nico being here, as instead of having just a few lines of dialogue for an NPC, there's often a full-blown character interaction that leads to more insight on how you should solve the puzzle. Even the notes contribute to this more, as you can often get a nice conversation over something so mundane. Something like being told a funny story or accidental racism. Twice. But let's move on from all the praise for Nico and move on to failure, and how it's funny in this game a lot of the time. Messing up something usually never feels good, so a lot of games will try to soften the blow in some way. Granted, there are games that fully want you to feel the punishment, however this is more of an exception rather than the norm. One of the best examples of this is Disco Elysium, where often failing a skill check gives you a funny interaction, or in some cases it doesn't even matter to the overall success of the task. OneShot does something similar, as a lot of times doing the wrong thing will often give you a good chuckle. My favorite example of this is trying to use a bottle on the phosphor pool, which Nico will tell you a story about doing the exact same thing and find out why you should do that. It's a funny story, it further fleshes out the character, it also provides some information on what the actual solution is. To put it simply, it's great. And this doesn't just happen once, this is scattered throughout the game, and sometimes you'll get an achievement for goofing around. Easily my favorite time this happens in the dirt area, which is all the information I'll give, because we might end up going knee deep into spoiler territory. Speaking of cutting things off, that's all I really have to discuss on the subject. Overall, I feel like while everyone has thoroughly discussed the story of OneShot, the gameplay aspect is majorly unexplored. Is the gameplay particularly exceptional? No, as it's more of a way to properly deliver the story in a way that I could in another format. If you want like a gameplay-focused game, you should play like, I don't know, something like the Resident Evil 4 remake. That's been pretty fun. However, I feel like it deserves more credit than it typically does, as it manages to avoid a ton of pitfalls a lot of games with a similar inventory puzzle system usually succumb to. And the puzzles manage to make logical sense, while not being so obvious that it's boring. You could say it suffers in the replayability department, but that's to be expected, as they were supposed to have one shot, after all. Also, just play the game if you haven't. This isn't a suggestion, this is a threat, as I will carpet bomb. Thanks for watching, tell me what you think, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.